The Grand Imperial Hotel stood like a monument to luxury on Fifth Avenue, its marble facade gleaming under the evening lights. Inside, Victoria Sterling adjusted her diamond bracelet as she surveyed the bustling lobby, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany reception desk. At 50, she carried herself with the practiced arrogance of someone born into wealth, her designer suit worth more than most people's monthly salary. "Marcus, I need everything perfect tonight," she said to the man beside her, her voice sharp with authority. "The charity gala preparation starts tomorrow, and those investors cannot see even the slightest flaw." Marcus Thompson, the 32-year-old head concierge, straightened his tie and nodded eagerly. His ambitious eyes gleamed as he absorbed every word from his superior, knowing that impressing Victoria Sterling was his ticket to advancement in the hospitality world. "Of course, Ms. Sterling. I've already briefed the staff about maintaining our standards," he replied, emphasizing the last word with a knowing look. David Washington pushed through the heavy glass doors of the Grand Imperial, his simple black suit wrinkled from travel, a worn leather briefcase in his hand. At 42, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, though his appearance suggested nothing more than a middle-class businessman. The lobby's opulence didn't faze him. He'd seen luxury before, though perhaps not from this particular angle. Approaching the reception desk, David waited patiently as Marcus finished a phone call, deliberately taking his time while eyeing David from head to toe. The assessment was swift and dismissive, another customer who probably couldn't afford to be here. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting he'd rather not. "I have a reservation, David Washington," David replied politely, setting his briefcase down. Marcus turned to his computer with exaggerated slowness, his fingers barely touching the keys as he pretended to search. The system seems particularly slow today. You'll need to wait." David glanced at his watch, but said nothing, observing as a well-dressed white couple approached the adjacent counter. Immediately, Sarah Chen, a young Asian-American receptionist, began processing their check-in with swift efficiency. The contrast wasn't lost on David, but he remained calm, pulling out a small leather notebook to jot down observations. "Still checking," Marcus announced after several minutes, though his screen clearly showed David's confirmed reservation. "You know, sometimes people make mistakes with their bookings. Are you sure you're at the right hotel?" "Quite sure," David responded, his voice steady. "I made this reservation 2 weeks ago. Confirmation number WH7892. Marcus made a show of typing the number, then frowned theatrically. "This is strange. The system shows irregularities." "Sarah, did you notice any issues with our booking platform today?" Sarah looked up from helping another guest, confusion crossing her features. "No, Marcus. Everything's been running smoothly. Would you like me to?" "I can handle this." Marcus cut her off, then turned back to David. "Sir, I'm going to need additional verification. Credit card, ID, and perhaps you could explain the nature of your stay." David complied without complaint, though he noticed Marcus's scrutiny of his identification was unusually thorough. "I'm here on business. Hospitality consulting." The word hospitality seemed to catch Marcus off guard for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Consulting? What kind of consulting exactly?" "Operational assessments," David replied vaguely, watching as Marcus processed 3 more guests who had arrived after him. 30 minutes had now passed since his arrival. Victoria Sterling materialized beside the reception desk. Having noticed the delay, her sharp eyes took in David's appearance and immediately formed conclusions. "Marcus, is there a problem with this gentleman's reservation?" "I'm afraid so, Miss Sterling. There seem to be some discrepancies in his booking information." David looked at Victoria directly. "There's no discrepancy. I have confirmed reservations for a junior suite on the 12th floor. The booking was made through your premium corporate portal." Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. Few guests knew about their corporate booking system, but she attributed it to lucky guessing. "Even if your reservation exists, I'm afraid that particular suite has been upgraded for one of our VIP guests. We can offer you a standard room on the 3rd floor." The third floor. David's voice remained calm, though Sarah noticed his grip tighten slightly on his briefcase handle. Miss Sterling, Victoria Sterling, General Manager. Ms. Sterling, I specifically requested and paid the premium for a high-floor suite. Your system should show this clearly. Sarah couldn't help herself. Actually, the system shows the 12th floor suites are still available. Would you like me to? Sarah, please focus on your own tasks, Victoria snapped, then turned back to David. Mr. Washington, we're experiencing unusual demand tonight. The accommodation we're offering is still quite comfortable. David studied both women carefully, then made another note in his leather book. I'm curious about your occupancy rates tonight. Are you really at full capacity, or is this standard practice for certain types of guests? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the professional terminology. Victoria's expression hardened. I don't appreciate implications, Mr. Washington. We treat all our guests equally. Of course, David replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. I'd like to proceed with check-in, then, whatever room you have available. 45 minutes after his arrival, David was finally handed a key card to room 307. As he walked toward the elevators, he noticed the ease with which other guests had been processed, the warm smiles and efficient service they'd received. His notebook now contained several pages of detailed observations. The room on the third floor was adequate, but hardly the luxury accommodation he'd reserved and paid for. David set his briefcase on the bed and opened it, revealing not the contents of a typical business traveler, but rather a collection of detailed floor plans, financial reports, and corporate documents bearing the letterhead Washington Hospitality Group. He pulled out his phone and speed-dialed a number. Linda, it's David. I'm at the Grand Imperial now. We need to discuss some serious concerns about operational standards here. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. What kind of concerns? The kind that could affect our investment decision. I'll need you and the board here tomorrow morning. There are some practices that need immediate attention. After ending the call, David returned to his notebook, writing detailed observations about check-in procedures, room assignment protocols, and staff behavior patterns. This wasn't his first undercover assessment, but it was already proving to be one of the most concerning. 2 hours later, David's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID before answering with a tired sigh. David Washington. Mr. Washington, this is Sarah from the front desk. I'm calling about... Well, I found something that might belong to you. David sat up straighter. What kind of something? An envelope. It was misplaced during your check-in. I think you should come down to retrieve it. Within minutes, David was back in the lobby, where Sarah waited nervously by the reception desk. Marcus was conspicuously absent. Where exactly was this envelope misplaced? David asked, accepting the thick manila envelope that bore his company's corporate seal. Sarah glanced around nervously. It was in Marcus's desk drawer. I was looking for extra key cards and... I'm sorry, Mr. Washington. I think there might have been some deliberate confusion during your check-in. Before David could respond, Marcus reappeared from the back office, his face paling when he saw David holding the envelope. What's going on here? Marcus demanded, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. I believe you know exactly what's going on, David replied, his patience finally wearing thin. This envelope contains confidential business documents. How did it end up in your desk drawer? There must be some mistake. Marcus! Victoria's voice cut through the lobby as she approached, having been summoned by the commotion. What's the meaning of this disturbance? David turned to face her, the envelope held prominently in his hands. Miss Sterling, I'd like to understand your hotel's policy on securing guest belongings. This envelope disappeared during check-in and was just retrieved from your employee's desk. Victoria's expression grew stern. Are you suggesting that Marcus stole from you? That's a very serious accusation. I'm asking for an explanation. These documents are worth several $1 million in business value. Several million? Marcus scoffed nervously, Come on, what could you possibly have that's worth? That's enough, Victoria interrupted. Mr. Washington, I don't appreciate guests making unfounded accusations against my staff. If you're missing personal items, you can file a report with hotel security. I'm not filing a report, David said quietly. I'm requesting that you review your security footage from the past 2 hours and explain how confidential corporate documents ended up in your employees' possession. Victoria's patience snapped. I don't have time for these games. If you're going to continue making baseless accusations and disrupting other guests' experiences, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the hotel. The lobby had grown quiet, other guests pausing to watch the unfolding drama. David looked around at the faces staring at him, then back at Victoria. You're asking me to leave? I'm telling you to leave. Security will escort you out if necessary. David nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. I see. And this is your final decision as general manager? It absolutely is. Very well. David pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Linda, change of plans. Cancel tomorrow morning's meeting here at the Grand Imperial. We'll be meeting at corporate headquarters instead, and I'll need you to bring the entire board of directors with you. Victoria frowned. Who exactly are you calling? David continued his conversation. Also, contact our legal team. We'll need a full investigation into operational practices at this property. Yes, immediately. Marcus stepped forward, his confidence returning. Look, buddy, I don't know who you think you're impressing with these phone calls, but Linda Rodriguez, Chief Operating Officer of Washington Hospitality Group, David said clearly into the phone. Please have security review all footage from the Grand Imperial's front desk area from 6 p.m. onward. Yes, I'll explain everything when you arrive. The color drained from Victoria's face. Washington Hospitality Group? David ended his call and turned to face her fully. Ms. Sterling, allow me to properly introduce myself. I'm David Washington, Chief Executive Officer of Washington Hospitality Group. We own this hotel. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked like he might faint. Victoria opened and closed her mouth several times without producing sound. Impossible, she finally whispered. You can't be. The CEO wouldn't just show up without what? Without advance notice? Without a security detail? Without the royal treatment you seem to think defines customer service? David's voice remained calm, but his words carried weight. I've been conducting unannounced operational assessments at our properties for 15 years, Ms. Sterling. This is how I evaluate the real customer experience. Sarah, who had been standing nearby in shock, found her voice. Mr. Washington, I'm so sorry about everything that happened. I tried to help, but you did help, Sarah. You tried to provide proper service, and you found my misplaced documents. That's exactly what I expect from our employees. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. Sir, there was a misunderstanding. I didn't know who you were. If I had known. Stop right there, David interrupted. If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently. That's exactly the problem. Every guest who walks through those doors deserves the same level of service, regardless of who they are or what they look like. Victoria attempted to regain control of the situation. Mr. Washington, please, let me explain. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. We can resolve this quietly without involving... Without involving who? The board of directors who are already on their way? The legal team that's preparing to review security footage? Or the guest who was discriminated against and had his property stolen? It wasn't stolen, Marcus protested weakly. It was just misplaced. David opened the envelope and pulled out several sheets of architectural plans and financial projections. These are the renovation plans for this hotel, Marcus. $50 million worth of improvements that were going to be approved at tomorrow's board meeting. The same meeting that was supposed to take place in your VIP conference room. The full weight of their actions was beginning to sink in for both Victoria and Marcus. They had not only mistreated their ultimate boss, but had potentially sabotaged a massive investment in their own property. Sir, Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, let me make this right. I can explain to the board that this was all a misunderstanding. The board will make their own judgments based on what they observe," David replied. "But I can tell you this. Linda Rodriguez and 5 other board members are about to walk through those doors. They're going to want detailed explanations about operational procedures, staff training, and customer service standards." As if summoned by his words, the hotel's main entrance opened, and a group of impeccably dressed professionals entered the lobby. Linda Rodriguez, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, led the group directly toward David. "David," she said, her voice carrying both concern and authority, "what exactly happened here?" David gestured toward Victoria and Marcus. "Linda, I'd like you to meet Victoria Sterling, General Manager, and Marcus Thompson, Head Concierge. They've just provided us with a comprehensive demonstration of this property's current service standards." The conference room on the hotel's executive floor had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. David sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, flanked by Linda Rodriguez and the 5 other board members of Washington Hospitality Group. Across from them sat Victoria Sterling and Marcus Thompson, both looking considerably less confident than they had hours earlier. Linda opened a laptop and began reading from her notes. "Based on security footage review and staff interviews, we've identified a pattern of discriminatory behavior that extends far beyond tonight's incident. Sarah Chen has provided testimony about multiple instances where guests of color experienced delayed service, room downgrades, and suspicious system errors during their stays." Victoria attempted to interject. "These are isolated incidents. You can't judge our entire operation based on..." "Isolated?" Board member James Patterson, a distinguished African-American man in his 60s, leaned forward. "Ms. Sterling, we've reviewed footage from the past 6 months. The pattern is consistent and disturbing." David pulled out his leather notebook, the same one Victoria and Marcus had seen him writing in earlier. "During my 3-hour stay, I documented 14 separate policy violations and discriminatory practices. The delayed check-in, the room downgrade, the mishandling of confidential documents, and the ultimate decision to eject a paying guest without proper investigation." Marcus, who had been silent throughout most of the meeting, finally spoke up. "Mr. Washington, sir, I want you to know that I never intended any disrespect. If I had known who you were, That's precisely the point, Mr. Thompson," Linda interrupted. "Service quality shouldn't depend on a guest's perceived status or the staff's knowledge of their identity. Every person who enters this hotel should receive the same level of professional treatment." David stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. 15 years ago, when I started this company, I made a promise that our hotels would be places where everyone felt welcome. Tonight, I experienced firsthand what it feels like to be unwelcome in my own establishment." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Linda consulted her tablet. "Ms. Sterling, your employment with Washington Hospitality Group is terminated immediately. Your severance package, stock options, and performance bonuses are forfeited due to the discriminatory practices documented during your tenure." Victoria's face went white. "But I've worked here for 8 years. This is my career, my reputation." "Your career and reputation are exactly what's at stake," board member Patricia Eng said firmly. "We cannot and will not tolerate managers who create hostile environments for guests or staff members." David turned back to the table. "Mr. Thompson, you are also terminated immediately. Additionally, your actions tonight constitute theft of corporate property. We are referring this matter to local authorities, and you will be blacklisted from employment within our industry network." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You can't do this. It's not fair. I was just following protocols." "Whose protocols?" James Patterson demanded. Show me the company manual that instructs employees to delay service for guests of color. Show me the policy that authorizes room downgrades based on appearance. Unable to respond, Marcus sank back into his chair, the reality of his situation finally settling in. Sarah Chen will be promoted to Assistant General Manager, effective immediately, David announced. Her salary will be increased by 50%, and she'll be enrolled in our Executive Leadership Program. Linda nodded and made notes. We're also implementing immediate changes to prevent future incidents. All staff will undergo mandatory diversity and inclusion training within the next 30 days. We're installing a new digital check-in system that eliminates human bias in room assignments, and we're establishing a direct hotline to corporate headquarters for guest service issues. David returned to his seat. Additionally, we're launching an internal audit of all 47 properties in our portfolio. Any location found to have similar issues will undergo complete management restructuring. Board member Robert Chen spoke for the first time. The Mystery Shopper program will be expanded to include individuals from diverse backgrounds. We'll be monitoring service quality, response times, and treatment consistency across all demographics. What about the renovation project? Victoria asked desperately. This hotel needs those improvements. The staff need their jobs. The renovation will proceed as planned, David replied, but under new management with new standards. The $50 million investment will go toward not just physical improvements, but comprehensive staff retraining and cultural transformation. Linda closed her laptop. Ms. Sterling, Mr. Thompson, you have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings and surrender all hotel property, including keycards, uniforms, and any confidential materials. As the two former employees left the conference room, David addressed the remaining board members. I want this story shared throughout our industry, not as a means of embarrassment, but as a demonstration of our commitment to equal treatment and professional service. Patricia Eng nodded. The hospitality industry needs to understand that discrimination disguised as standards or protocols will not be tolerated. This case will become required a reading at hotel management schools. Over the following weeks, the transformation at the Grand Imperial became visible to everyone. Sarah Chen, now Assistant General Manager, implemented new training programs that emphasized dignity and respect for all guests. The hotel's customer satisfaction scores improved dramatically, rising from 6.8 to 9.3 within 6 months. The story of David's experience spread throughout the hospitality industry, initially through professional networks and eventually reaching major business publications. It became a Harvard Business School case study on crisis management and inclusive leadership, demonstrating how systematic change could emerge from confronting discrimination. Other luxury hotel chains began reaching out to Washington Hospitality Group, requesting consultation on diversity training and service equity programs. The Grand Imperial's approach became a model for the industry, proving that excellent service and inclusive practices were not only compatible but mutually reinforcing. Marcus Thompson's attempt to find employment elsewhere in hospitality was unsuccessful. The industry's tight-knit network ensured that his discriminatory behavior became widely known, effectively ending his career in customer service. Victoria Sterling faced similar challenges, her reputation permanently damaged by the incident and its aftermath. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen flourished in her new role, implementing innovative programs that attracted positive media attention and increased bookings. Her success demonstrated the value of promoting employees who embodied the company's values rather than those who perpetuated harmful practices. 6 months after that fateful evening, David Washington stood once again in the lobby of the Grand Imperial Hotel. This time, however, the atmosphere was completely different. The same marble floors gleamed under the chandeliers, but the energy was warm and welcoming. Staff members of diverse backgrounds moved efficiently throughout the space, greeting guests with genuine smiles and professional courtesy. Sarah Chen approached him, her confidence evident in her posture and demeanor. Mr. Washington, welcome back. I trust you'll find our service much improved since your last visit. David smiled, noting the subtle humor in her greeting. I have no doubt about that, Sarah. Tell me, how has the transition been for the staff? Challenging at first, she admitted, but transformative. The diversity training opened eyes that many didn't even realize were closed. We've had several staff members come forward to discuss their own experiences with discrimination, both as employees and as observers of customer interactions. As they walked through the lobby, David observed the seamless interaction between staff and guests of all backgrounds. The check-in process he witnessed was efficient and courteous, with no variation in treatment based on appearance or perceived status. The numbers tell an encouraging story, Sarah continued. Our employee satisfaction scores have increased by 40%. Guest complaints have dropped to near zero, and we've had a 35% increase in repeat bookings. It turns out that treating people well is actually good for business. David chuckled. Revolutionary concept. What about the industry response? We've had delegations from 12 other hotel chains visit to study our training programs. The Hospitality Industry Diversity Initiative has adopted our protocols as their standard recommendation. It's becoming harder for companies to claim they don't know how to implement fair service practices. They paused near the reception desk, where David observed a young black businessman checking in. The interaction was smooth and professional, with the desk clerk offering upgrades and amenities without hesitation. The contrast to David's own experience 6 months earlier was stark and encouraging. There's something else, Sarah said, lowering her voice slightly. We've received over 200 letters from customers sharing their own experiences with discrimination at various hotels. Your story gave them courage to speak up about treatment they'd previously accepted as normal. David nodded thoughtfully. The ripple effects of confronting discrimination extended far beyond a single hotel or even a single company. What are we doing with those letters? We're working with civil rights organizations to document patterns of discrimination across the industry. Several companies have already implemented policy changes rather than face public scrutiny. It's creating pressure for systematic improvement. As they continued their walk, David reflected on the lessons learned from that difficult evening. You know, Sarah, when I first started conducting these undercover assessments, I expected to find operational inefficiencies, maybe some customer service gaps. I never anticipated discovering the level of systematic discrimination we uncovered here. Do you think it's widespread? She asked. I think it's more common than people want to admit, and more subtle than many people recognize. Discrimination doesn't always involve dramatic confrontations or obvious slurs. Sometimes it's just slower service, less convenient room assignments, or staff who assume certain customers can't afford premium options. They reached the hotel's business center, where David noticed a diverse group of professionals working quietly at the available stations. The transformation was complete. This was now a space where anyone could feel comfortable and welcome. The most important lesson, David continued, is that change requires intentional action. It's not enough to say you don't discriminate. You have to actively create systems and cultures that prevent discrimination from occurring. Sarah pulled out her tablet and showed him the latest customer feedback reports. Look at this comment from last week. Finally, a luxury hotel where I felt truly welcome from the moment I walked in. The staff treated me like a valued guest, not like someone who needed to prove I belonged there. David read several similar comments, each one reinforcing the importance of the changes they'd implemented. These stories matter, Sarah. They represent real people who can now travel with dignity, who don't have to brace themselves for potential humiliation when they approach a hotel reception desk. What's next for our company? Sarah asked. We're expanding the Mystery Shopper program to include not just racial diversity, but age, disability status, and economic background variations. We want to understand how all types of guests experience our service. Additionally, we're working with hospitality schools to ensure future managers are trained from the beginning about inclusive service practices. As their tour concluded, David paused near the hotel's main entrance, the same doors through which he'd been escorted out 6 months earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. Sarah, I want you to know that your courage in speaking up that night changed not just this hotel, but potentially the entire industry. It takes bravery to challenge discrimination, especially when it might put your job at risk. I couldn't stay silent, she replied. I'd watched too many good people be treated poorly because of others' prejudices. Someone had to take a stand. David pulled out a business card and handed it to her. I'm recommending you for our regional manager training program. If you're interested, you could be overseeing multiple properties within 2 years. Sarah's eyes widened. Mr. Washington, thank you. I won't let you down. You already haven't, he assured her. Your success here proves that diverse leadership isn't just the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. As David prepared to leave, he turned to address the lobby one final time. Several guests and staff members had gathered, recognizing him from news coverage of the hotel's transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the space. 6 months ago, this hotel failed to live up to its potential. Not because of its facilities or location, but because it allowed discrimination to masquerade as standard operating procedure. He paused, making eye contact with various individuals in the crowd. Today, the Grand Imperial stands as proof that businesses can change, that leaders can grow, and that customers of all backgrounds can expect and receive excellent service. A spontaneous round of applause began, growing until it filled the entire lobby. David raised his hand to quiet the crowd. But our work isn't finished. Every time you choose to spend your money at businesses that treat all customers with dignity, you're voting for the kind of world you want to live in. Every time you speak up when you see discrimination, you're helping to create change. He gestured towards Sarah, who was standing nearby. And every time you support leaders who prioritize fairness and inclusion, you're investing in a future where everyone can travel, dine, and conduct business without fear of discrimination. As the crowd began to disperse, individual guests approached David to share their own stories and thank him for taking a stand. One elderly black woman, tears in her eyes, told him about decades of travel experiences where she felt unwelcome. A young Latino businessman described how the hotel's transformation had given him confidence to book stays at other luxury properties. These personal interactions reminded David why the difficult confrontation 6 months earlier had been necessary. Behind every policy change and training program were real people whose lives were improved by the elimination of discriminatory practices. Before leaving the hotel, David posted a message on his company's social media accounts. True hospitality means creating spaces where everyone feels valued and welcome. It means recognizing that excellent service isn't determined by a guest's appearance, but by our commitment to treating all people with dignity and respect. The post was shared thousands of times within hours, with users adding their own experiences and calling for similar accountability in other industries. The conversation that began with one man's humiliating experience at a hotel had evolved into a broader dialogue about systematic discrimination and the power of leadership to create positive change. As David's car pulled away from the Grand Imperial, he reflected on the journey from that evening's discrimination to today's transformation. The process had been challenging, sometimes painful, but ultimately necessary. Real change required courage, the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, to hold people accountable for their actions, and to implement systematic solutions rather than simply punishing individuals. The hospitality industry would never be the same, and that was exactly the point. Sometimes it takes one person's willingness to say, "This is not acceptable," to spark changes that benefit thousands of others. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about creating a world where future David Washingtons won't have to experience discrimination in the first place. The Grand Imperial Hotel now stood as more than just a luxury accommodation. It had become a symbol of what was possible when leaders chose inclusion over prejudice, when employees chose courage over silence, and when companies chose systemic change over maintaining the status quo. And in boardrooms, hotel lobbies, and hospitality schools across the country, people were asking themselves a simple but powerful question. What kind of service do we really want to provide, and what kind of world do we want to create? The answer, David knew, would determine not just the future of the hospitality industry, but the future of how we treat each other as human beings.